Well, we're so happy to have Jan Coppola Bills with us tonight as our speaker. Jan is an author, national speaker, entrepreneur, landscape designer, and she's an advanced master gardener. She holds a Master's of Art in Organizational Management and her Bachelor of Science in Business and Management. So she spent a successful career in the corporate world to start out with. And then she made a major life reassessment, which I love, and followed her heart. She traded in her heels for wellies and started the Detroit area landscape design company, Two Women and a Hoe. You got to love that name too. Jan shares her passion for gardening, nature, and wildlife with her clients and her large online community. Jan is the author of Late Bloomer, How to Garden with Comfort, Ease, and Simplicity in the Second Half of Life, which I, for one, can appreciate. And that came out in 2016. And that is the subject of her discussion tonight. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jan.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to share lots of information with you tonight. So let's get started. I have a lot of slides, but don't be concerned. There's a lot of good information to share with you. So I want to start with a quick little story about Can't Never Could. Well, back in 2005, my brother, a big burly guy, called me on the phone and he said, I have something for you. I'll be right over. And knowing Michael, I knew it would be good. So I waited for Michael to pull up in his truck in my driveway, F-150, big burly guy, goes to the bed, pulls out a boulder, came running at me and he said, look what I made you. And I said, well, Michael, how did you do that? So in the boulder, he had inscribed Jano's Garden. And as a children, he called me Jano. So I said, how did you do that? And he said, Can't Never Could. So I'm going to tell you the rest of the story at the end so you cannot go anywhere. So gardeners, wouldn't you agree that if you woke up in the morning and something didn't hurt, you would think you were dead? So that's how I feel just about every morning when I get up from work, but it's a good kind of hurt. So in my book, Late Bloomer, a publisher said, what are some of your credos? What are things that you live by? And although they have changed throughout the years, because I published my book in 2016, and even since then, some things have changed. But a few things that still ring very true to me is, first and foremost, that I will ask for help if necessary, because we want to keep doing what we love to do. Sometimes we have to ask for help. And then also, I will not concern myself with perfection. So early on, when I first started gardening, everything had to be perfect. But I've learned throughout many years that nature is perfectly imperfect. So we're going to talk about design for sustainability. Now, anytime I do a presentation, I always have to start at the design process, because if we want to sustain the garden and sustain the gardener, we have to start at the design process. So it doesn't have to be a big elaborate design, but there are just some design principles that I'm going to share with you that will really help your garden to enhance and be the best that it could be. And I've got so many tips to share with you. So we're going to talk about designing tips. We're going to talk about planting at odd numbers, functional bedline, mass planting, welcoming entrances, inside looking out, winter interest, and right plant, right place, which is my favorite. So plant in odd numbers. And if I were there, I would ask you, why do we plant in odd numbers? Well, there is a specific reason why we do this. So we plant in odd numbers because visually it is more appealing to the eye. And many of you may already know this. So we always want to do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Now, if we're hedging, we don't put in an odd number just to have an odd number if we're hedging and everything's going to grow together. But planting in odd numbers always makes such a difference in the garden. So that is a basic design principle. It's also a principle that we use inside the home when we're designing. So always odd numbers. And the reason is that when we do even numbers, like let's say if we were doing 2 arborvitae, if you just did 2, the eye is going to separate that, and you're not going to get that visual impact that you would do, or that you would have if you were doing 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So always odd numbers. So here's just a design that I wanted to point out a couple things on the screen. how we line plants up, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, but I always like to do things either zigzag, maybe you do 4 in a row and you pop one forward or pop one back. And the reason for this is that when we're looking at our gardens, we want them to be 3-dimensional. We just don't want one straight view. So it's important to round things. If you're coming around a corner, round the plants, do the zigzag, anything that, except just straight lines, always straight lines. So we want to crisscross, do things that are going to make it more 3-dimensional, because when you're looking at your gardens, no matter what way you're looking at them, if you're coming one way down the street or another way down the street, you want to see a 3-dimensional garden as opposed to something just flat. Now we're going to talk about functional bed lines, because functional bed lines, remember, we want to sustain the garden and the gardener. So functional bed lines are very important. And this would be my first question. And although we can't all answer it, I would just ask, who thinks this is a good garden or a cute garden? And it is all those things. And remember, I'm going to share a lot of things with you, but at the end of the day, your gardens have to be appealing and joyful to you. So if you think this is a really pretty garden, then yes, it is. But what I want to point out is, remember, we're talking about sustaining the gardener. So why this would not be considered a functional bed line, you can see all those little curves where you'd have to go in and mow the lawn. We really want to avoid that. We want to sustain the gardener. We don't want to make work harder than it needs to be. So yes, it's cute. Oftentimes people will say, well, it's too repetitive. But the real reason for this photo is just to show you what a not so functional bed line looks like. So let me show you. This is a project that we did, and we're just laying the plants out. But I want to just impress upon you the importance of bed edges. So bed edges serve a couple purposes. For one thing, they keep the grass out of the bed. So when you're doing your bed lines and you're going in with your half moon spade for your bed lines, and I'm going to show you that a little bit later as well, but you want to make those bed lines really deep. And the reason we do that is that we want to keep the grass out of our bed. So remember, when you have nice deep bed lines, what you're doing is you're preventing the grass from growing into the garden bed. Remember, grasses can be very invasive. But what I want you to notice in this, when you're doing your bed lines, make sure they're big, curvy bed lines. Now, the angle of this photo here doesn't really show how big actually and swoopy those bed lines are, but we always want big, swoopy bed lines. Let me show you some more. So here's another one, and this is the reason I'm going to show you this one is that I want you to take notice of the walkway and see how the bed line goes from one end and then it picks up on the other end. So visually, bed lines are there so the eye can follow the garden bed, and it's just this big swoopy, when you're glancing, it's just easy for the eye to follow. So even when you go home later, or you're at home because we're not in person, but maybe when we're done here, go out and look at your bed lines and ask yourself, are these functional, sustainable bed lines? And especially look at your crosswalks, because that's always really important to make sure that you're picking that bed line up on the other end. I'm going to show you some more. So here's another design, and see how the bed lines at the walkway are meeting together. So that's really important. So your eye is just following one swoopy line right across the walkway. So here's another one. Again, the picture doesn't show how big that bed line actually is when it swoops around, but it is, and it's quite gorgeous. So we want our bed lines to be nice and deep so that the eye can follow it. So now we're going to talk about mass planting, and I'm going to go quickly because there's a lot of things to cover with you, but we're going to talk about mass planting, and there's reasons why we mass plant, because visually it is more impactful as opposed to a lot of onesies in the garden. Now, at some point, I'm going to show you where I like to break all the rules, but for just right now, always when you're designing your gardens, when you're adding things, always think in terms of mass planting. So let me show you some examples. Here's another design. You can see in the design all the like symbols and how everything is mass planted. Again, because it is just way more visually appealing than onesies. Let me show you some more. So here's actually a client's home. This is the driveway, so it's a circular driveway. You can see all the beautiful knockout roses in the back. And then we have Lady's Mantle in the front. And it is, the picture may not even show how beautiful it is in person, but when you're coming down the street, because you have this big bed of gorgeous roses, and then the Lady's Mantle, it just catches the eye. So it's very beautiful. Let me show you some more. So you can see the mass plant of peony, and you can see the mass plant of the Annabelle hydrangea. So always, when you can, mass plant. Okay, now we're going to talk about welcoming entrances. And I don't show this picture to shame anybody, because we know that when life gets in the way, sometimes our gardens take a back seat. But again, we're talking about sustaining the environment, sustaining the gardener. So this would not be considered a sustainable practice. For one thing, you'd have to spend the whole season in the summertime shearing things down just so you can see out your windows. So that's not what we want. We want to have it easy for the gardener. We don't want to put shrubs in the wrong place. And when we get to right plant, right place, I think you'll really see why I like to drive this home. But I do like to tell people that if I fell back there, my husband wouldn't find me till dinner time. So if you're not convinced about right plant, right place, and how this is not a sustainable practice for the garden or the environment, just think that it may be a security risk. So we don't know what could go on behind it. We want our entrances open and welcoming to guests. So here's a really nice visual of what a welcoming entrance looks like. Make no mistake how we get into the home. So nobody should ever visit your home and say, where is the front door? So we want that open and inviting all the time. Here's another entrance. Now this is an entrance to another garden, but then again, you can see the pathway going through under the arbor, but it's very open, it's very visual, and it's very welcoming. So always remember, we want welcoming entrances. And let's not forget inside looking out. So when you're designing your gardens, make sure that you give yourself a room with a view. So stand at your kitchen sink and make sure when you look out, you see something really beautiful. Or if you're in your favorite chair, when you're sitting, make sure you give yourself a room with a view. Now let's talk about winter interest, because again, that's very important when we're designing our gardens. We always want to make sure that we're including things for winter interest. I want to give you an example. This is not winter interest. So believe it or not, somebody had this homeowner wrap every evergreen in the front of their home. This is not considered winter interest. If ever somebody encourages you to do this, it is one thing, and that is an upsell. So it's not necessary. If you've got to wrap shrubs like this, then you've definitely got the wrong plant in the wrong place. Here's another example. I just think this must be the 7 drawers. This is visual to a street. So can you imagine looking at this? So in Michigan, we would be looking at that for a good 7 months, maybe even 8 months a year. So this is not considered winter interest, but winter interest is very important in your gardens. So I want to show you this picture. This is about 5 years ago. We did this sweet little ranch home, and you can see that there's no winter interest. There's snow on the ground. So this picture was taken in early spring. And it is a all perennial garden, all small perennials. And you can see that it almost looks like a barren property. So look at the difference after the landscape. I think it just completely changes up the front of the home. And we do have winter interest. We have native plants in here. We have everything in this garden, and the improvement is just immense compared to what it was. So I hope this is a good visual for you to see how we have to include things for winter interest. So here's just some winter interest. And sometimes less is more. So this is so beautiful. We've got the peeling bark on the trees. We got beautiful evergreens and just a lovely statue, all wonderful winter interest in the garden. So this is not considered winter interest. So we were actually working in the next door neighbor's home. And then someone came out, started tying up all the grasses. They looked like ponytails, and we were just kind of giggling. But know that this also is not considered winter interest. I love grasses. I don't love all grasses, but I do love grasses, and they do create beautiful winter interest. But let's not put ponytails in them. So just some other things we talked about: peeling barks, bent blooms, uh, beautiful red twigs. These are all considered nice winter interest in your gardens. And then here we have a boulder. So I love putting boulders in gardens, and it is the one thing that you can put in your garden and it is 100% maintenance free. So what I love about this garden is that you have the spiky grasses, you have pretty roses, hydrangea in the background, and then you have this beautiful hard texture. So I always like including boulders in gardens. Excuse me, I have to cough for 1 second. Okay, now don't forget water. So water is so beautiful, especially at the entrance. And did you know that most wildlife is going to die due to lack of water and not lack of food? So whenever you can put water out for water life, it's for water, winter, for wildlife, it is so important to do that. And they just love it all through the year. And even in the wintertime, you can heat those baths and have wildlife in your gardens all winter long. So, excuse me. So don't forget, even in your gardens, this is at a client's home, and she made this art piece, and we wanted to incorporate it into her garden. So don't be shy in putting your personality into your gardens as well. Now, this is a pathway, and there's a couple reasons why I like including pathways in a garden. So it just happens that this pathway leads to the homeowner's spigot, which is really important. We never want to have to climb over shrubs to get to our spigot. So make sure that you give yourself a nice, easy path to walk through to get to whatever it is you have to get in. You want a path, you don't want it to be a pathway to nowhere. You want it to be a pathway to somewhere. Now, why I also like this with the pathway is sometimes when you have a really long garden, a nice wide long garden, pathways help to just divide up one big garden into two separate gardens. So always include a pathway if it's needed in your gardens. And this one actually is very functional, and it also creates, again, winter interest. So my favorite to talk about is right plant, right place. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures just because I love driving home right plant, right place and how important it is. So one of the first things that every gardener should have in their toolbox is a tape measure. It's so important. When we get those plants at home, even before we get them home, we have to read the plant labels. If a label says that the plant is going to get 10 feet wide, we have to assume it's going to get 10 feet wide. So the tape measure is very important. Now, that's why sometimes new installations, when we're putting in new gardens, aren't always as attractive as when they're full gardens, 3 to 5 years when they start filling out, because you have to have that space in between the plantings so they have room to grow. Now, oftentimes when we're driving around and we see something, I have to snap pictures. So this was on a very busy road, went by and I said, wait, stop, we have to see what that is. Well, after further inspection, it's obviously deer damage. But from when you're racing by in the car and you see this, I just thought who's ever shearing that should never shear again. But for the purposes of wrong plant, wrong place, if you have deer, you have to plant accordingly. And there are so many nice deer-resistant plants. Yes, I know if they're hungry, they're going to eat anything. But if you have deer, you have to have deer-resistant plants. So this is a first picture of wrong plant, wrong place. All right, here's another picture. And I was actually measuring the client's home, which was what was across the street from this house. And I just happened to glance up, and this is a large home. This is only a portion. But remember that scale is very important when you're adding plants to your garden, or if you're re-landscaping, or you're redoing a new bed. You always want to think scale. And you could see these itty bitty little plants. before they even grow up, I will probably be dead. So we want to make sure that we're bringing plants in that are visually going to be, yes, 3 to 5 years, but we don't want to wait 25 years for a plant to grow up. So when you're deciding on adding plants, figure to yourself, where do I want to add height? Where do I want to draw the eye up? This home happens to be a 2-story home, so we want to always draw the eye up so that people can see your home. We don't want to have them look at the ground to see your landscape only. So I love this picture, and it is clearly wrong plant, wrong place. And you could see the right turn only. So there's so many things wrong with this picture, but I just have to say that whoever shears it really belongs in Disneyland, because this is an excellent shearing job. And I like how they cut out the little window so people could see that when they're stopped at this sign, tree, whatever it is. So wrong plant, wrong place. Here's another example. So this was local. I'm driving, saw this, had to get a picture. Now, there's a lot of, I know I said you have to have a lot of space in between the plants, but these are never going to get that wide. So I just like to kiddingly say this happens to be an orthodontist office. So I always just say, this is what happens when you floss too much. But you could see that this is just not the way we want to plant things. So again, that tape measure is very important. Let me show you another one. So we just call these stuffed sausages. Oftentimes when we're planting arborvitae for privacy or anything for privacy, right away people say, I want instant gratification. But gardeners, we have to be careful with that, because this is what you get when they get full size. And we don't want this. So there's a nice fence there, but we have these arborvitaes just popping through. So that's why you've got to take that tape measure out. You have to be patient, let things grow to their natural size and not crowd them in like this. So love this picture. These are actually two rhododendron, and I've never seen rhododendron this big, but I always say that I would tear down this little yellow house before I would touch those rhododendron. But again, this is just not necessarily wrong plant, but you can see how they're up against the house. So for some reason, people just like to plant right up against the house, and they don't think, how big is this going to get in 3 to 5 years? And you must ask yourself that before planting. So here's another one. This is a client. We didn't do this. We wouldn't do this to any plant, but right behind those arborvitae are the picture window. So imagine in the morning, you open your blinds up and you look at evergreens 365 days out of the year. So just imagine how dark it must be back there. So just wrong plant, wrong place. And we won't even talk about the shearing job. Oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Let me go forward. So same with evergreens, big evergreens. So this evergreen has only been in the ground a couple years. You can already see they cannot grow into the home. So you must pull plants out away from the house. Another advantage to doing that is when you pull plants out and you look at them from the window, you can actually see your garden. So don't be shy in pulling your gardens out so that you can see them from the inside. But you know, eventually this is going to be half of a evergreen because they just can't grow into structure. So this really drives me crazy because I see this a lot of times around town. Here's another one. I don't know why or what possesses someone to put all the arborvitaes in front of their windows. So we know that we put plants, windows in to see out. So we should put plants in that allow us to see out. I don't hate this at all, but it's just unfortunate that you cannot see out their windows only to look at arborvitae. And here we go. We're going to put in an evergreen and we're going to put it right in front of the window. So this happens way too often. And I just like to drive this home so that we're very prudent about right plant, right place. Excuse me. So now I'm going to show you this picture because a couple things are wrong here. These are green giants. You can see they're burning out. They're all burnt out around the base and even coming up to the plant. So here's a couple things wrong. If ever you're going to burn something, Berming is great because oftentimes you can control your soil. If you have an undesirable soil, if it's very sandy, or if it's very heavy clay, building up, berming up is a great idea. But when you are berming up, it is important that at the top that you're leveling off that top flat and not, you can see how this is pitched on an angle. So water just continuously runs off, which is why we have die out in our green giants. So if you are going to berm, which is a great idea, just make sure you're flattening off the top. So as the water's coming down, it's not going to run off. And then also there are rocks in this garden, and I don't know how you feel about rocks, but as someone that maintains gardens, rocks are just, they're really hard to crawl around in, and they're really hard to pull weeds out of. So I know in Florida they use a lot of rocks because they say they have bad ant problems. We don't have bad ant problems. People put rocks in because they think it's going to stop the weeds, and it doesn't. It just makes things worse. So this, you can see there's also landscape fabric in here, and I'm going to talk about landscape fabric a little bit later. But between the landscape fabric, the slope, and the rocks, these never get any water. So we want to avoid that as well. Now, I'm showing you this. This is a forsythia. This is what a forsythia should look like. When we put the right plants in the right place, let them grow to their mature size, then we have a nice looking shrub without all that shearing to make, because most of the forsythias I see around here are either shaped in a ball or a square or a football. So it's just crazy. Put the right plant in the right place. Most of our pruning and shearing should be most of our pruning should be at the base. We shouldn't be shearing off the top just to keep plants small because we put them in the wrong place. So right plant, right place is so important. Now we're going to talk about stand-up gardens, and I like stand-up gardens as I get older, although I'm on my knees all day long. But for most of us, I just think stand-up gardens as we're getting a little bit older makes it so much easier to garden. And I will tell you, even with young people, when I go to their homes for design because they want new gardens, new landscapes, nobody ever asks for a high maintenance garden. So really important, unless you just like being out there all the time, we really want to strive for gardens that will keep us off our knees and on our feet. So I'm just going to show you a series of plants, and I think because we share the same hardiness zones, that they're going to be available to you as well. But my main point in this is that there's so many beautiful small ornamental shrubs. I like them. You put them in the right spot, and you're not going to have all that shearing, all that extra work that we just want to get away from so we can enjoy our gardens more. So I love new plants. I'm always looking for new plants. They're always coming out with something just wonderful, and even more and more small ornamental shrubs for a reason, because people don't want to be crawling around their gardens all day, 7 days a week. So first of all, when we're thinking about plants and when we go plant shopping, we always want to think foliage first, flower second, because believe it or not, nurseries like to force blooms because they know that we gravitate towards them. But you can see even in this picture, nothing is blooming, but look at the beautiful foliage, the different textures that we get without even a flower. So whenever you're looking for plants, it doesn't always have to be a flower. The foliage is beautiful. So kind of concentrate on foliage first, flower second. Now, also don't forget white blooms. This is a garden that we take care of, and it's all green and white, and it is absolutely stunning. It's not a big garden, but it is a beautiful garden. So don't forget white blooms in your garden. Now, I'm just going to go through a series of plants, and there's portions of this presentation that I can send to Wendy, or I'm sorry, to Heidi. Yes, to Heidi, I will send them to, and then she can distribute them to everyone. So you don't have to write all this down. So maybe she can just send out a mass email with some of my favorite plants and the reasons why I like them. So these are 9 barks. I like them. They're native to Michigan. They have all different kinds of sizes. So they start from tiny wine all the way up to Diablo. It's a nice native plant. I like to plant it because of the foliage. Yes, it gets a small flower, but it's really that foliage that is just absolutely beautiful in the garden. So this is why I like 9-barks. I like Black Lake's elderberry. Again, it does get a 10-inch pink flower, but I really planted for that lovely foliage. So again, foliage first, flower second. And then this is a new one called Lace Up Elderberry. It's been out a couple years, but what I love about it is it's very tall and it's not very wide. So if you have a small space or you have where you want to create some height, but you don't have a lot of width, Lace Up Elderberry is very nice. Again, native to Michigan, and they do have the berries and the wildlife love them. And then, of course, we have our panicle hydrangeas. There's so many on the market and they're coming out more and more. I love them. For us in Michigan, I think it's a shrub that gives us the biggest bang for our buck. And I also love that it creates really beautiful winter interest. So absolutely love our oak leaf hydrangea. Invincible wee whites. There's also, for the invincibles, the little wee whites in the bottom, you can see behind. That's called a mini mauvette. And what I love about these two little hydrangea is that they only get about 2 feet tall. So our hydrangeas can come to the front of the garden as opposed to being a backdrop to something else. So these are really pretty, sweet little hydrangeas. And one time I used them in a garden. We had a Japanese maple and I used that pink mini mauvette more like a ground cover underneath that beautiful Japanese maple. So they're really nice to have in the garden. And of course, I love oak leaf hydrangea. So I know I'm showing a lot of hydrangeas because I do love them. This is Bobo. I love the little Bobo hydrangea. Only gets about 3 feet tall. Again, beautiful winter interest. And then here's our smooth leaf. So we have the Invincible and the Incredible, which is the old Annabelle, but the Incredible doesn't flop like the Annabelle used to, and just beautiful hardy shrubs in the garden. And again, all these shrubs are going to keep you on your feet and off your knees instead of all this on our knees constantly. So this is one of my favorite little shrubs. I don't know if you have it yet, but it's called Spilled Wine Weigelia. And I'm not always a fan of all the Weigelia family, but I do love this one because it's mounded, it's smaller. It makes a pretty little hedge if you wanted to as a hedge, but it is a nice little compact Weigelia. And of course, I love that foliage on it. Drift roses, don't know if you have them yet, but I love the drift roses. Beautiful in the garden. You got a hot, sunny spot. Drift roses are beautiful. And then the Pugster butterfly bush. So we have that. Love the Pugster butterfly bush. Another easy plant in the garden, and it does attract the butterflies. It's really quite beautiful. And then dwarf fothergilla, I love this shrub, again, native to Michigan, deer resistant. I didn't mention that your 9-barks are deer resistant, your dwarf fothergilla are, your Weigelia, what else? I have a few more that are going to be deer resistant as well. I like this shrub. This shrub is not a large shrub. It only gets maybe about 3 feet tall, but I do love it for the lovely foliage and the honey scent blooms in the springtime. So Ito peony, the most beautiful out of all peony. It's a cross between a tree peony and the old-fashioned peony. This is a Japanese peony, absolutely lovely, deer resistant, a must-have in your garden. Yes, they only bloom in spring, but we like 4-season interest gardens. So I recommend adding these to your garden. And then this is fine line buckthorn. It not to be confused with the invasive buckthorn that we have rampant in Michigan. But this is fine line buckthorn. The reason I love it, deer resistant. And if again you have a spot where you want to create some height but not width, it's a really fun plant in a mass plant. I love it. It kind of resembles how ornamental grass will billow. Really nice plant and easy to take care of. You're not going to shear this or do anything with that. So now I'm just showing you some columnar trees because oftentimes we forget about columnar trees. We're looking to put a tree in our landscapes or in our gardens, but we don't have the width. We have the height space, but not the width. So your pyramidal trees are very lovely. I use them all the time for small spaces. Many varieties, your beech, your ginkgos, your maples, your oaks, really nice. So if you're looking for a tall tree with not a lot of width, these are your go-tos. So plant sales. excuse me. So when I spot a plant sale, know that unless you have a plan and you're buying all these plants because they're on sale, more often than not, I find them in the garden, in the container, never planted and dead. So it's never a good deal unless you're going to put it in the garden. And I always say, just like when you go grocery shopping, you have a list of food. You don't go hungry because you'll buy things you don't need. Same with the garden. When you go to the garden center, have a plan, have a list so that you're going to buy what you need and you can bring them home and plant them and they can live happily ever after. Now, I would ask you if we were all there, which plant would you select? More often than not, our master gardeners say, what I'm looking at, the plant to the right, so the thick, dense one, that's what you want to look for when you're buying plants. It's not to say the one on the left is not going to do well. It is, but plants are expensive. Make sure that you're getting the best plant for your money. Always buy top quality plants, and I say just inspect before you select. So here's just a few things that you're going to look for. Make sure that you're getting a nice, healthy plant to bring home to your gardens. So you've seen this before where you have a plant, the roots are coming out the bottom of it. You should never have to take an axe to break up a root system. So when you're shopping, turn those plant containers over, see if roots are coming through the plant. And you can even squeeze that plant a little bit if you can't pull it out. So you just squeeze with your hands. If you can't get it out of the container, forget it. It's root bound. You don't need it. Put it back. Or if you've ever done this, you've pulled the plant out and then half the soil is left in the container. It hasn't had a good opportunity to root itself. I'm not saying it wouldn't do well in your garden, but remember, they're expensive. So what we want is this. You want to just gently squeeze that container a little bit and gently pull that plant out and have a nice root system like what we see here. Now, oftentimes clients will ask, well, what size plant should I buy? Just a couple of things I want you to know. So in garden centers, we start with 1 gallon, 3 gallon, 5 gallon, 7 gallon containers. I always, when I can, I always will go to a smaller container because often what we're doing is we're just buying more soil. Remember, gardens are going to take 3 to 5 years before they mature. So I like buying a smaller container. So if I'm going to buy one plant in a smaller container and save money, I can probably buy 2 more in the smaller container. So always go for the small container. It's going to take time for them to mature and save yourself some money. Now, we're seeing again this. Oh, I went the wrong way. I'm sorry. Let's go this way. Okay, our next quiz is overgrown or lush. And I wish that I could see all the people who say overgrown and those who say lush. Well, if you say overgrown, I would beg to differ. I would say it is a lush garden, and we love lush gardens, and here's why. Because when we have lush gardens, here's what we don't have. We don't have all the watering, we don't have all the weeding, and we don't have all the mulching, which, oh, by the way, gets very expensive. So know that it's okay if plants touch a little bit. What we don't want is overcrowding where half a plant is dying out. But always go for lush. Lush is so lovely. Let me show you some more pictures. Lush. Isn't that beautiful? So this is a shaded part of the garden, and it's just, we take care of these gardens. We don't have all these weeds all over. The maintenance is minimal. So you always want to fill those beds out. Here's another one. So lush over here would be your left. Yes, we're all looking the same way. Usually it's people in the audience, so they're looking right and it's my left, but the left garden, lush, lush. Same with the right garden. It's just so lush and beautiful. And the work is so minimized when you fill out those garden beds. Sometimes people say, oh, I like all that space in between my gardens, but just know that nobody should ever look at your gardens and say, oh, her mulch or his mulch is so lovely. So we put mulch in gardens. We put it in to retain moisture, we put it in to suppress weeds, and we put it in as it's decomposing, it's adding nutrients to the soil. So it shouldn't be the highlight of your garden beds. Now, we do love mulch and we use a lot of mulch, but we do not love this. And we see this, these pictures are current around town, so people are still doing this. And we have, as Master Gardens, have got to educate them on not doing this. Here's another stop the truck. We said we like berms, but I just cannot figure out what's going on here. And I would love to know how they keep that mulch from not washing down that big. That is a big slope. So yes, yay to berming up, but nay to this kind of slope. So this is just a little tip. If you're mulching or you have somebody mulching for you, you have maybe tender perennials that you put in. It's just nice that you can protect them. They dump the mulch, they spread it around, then you can just lift this up and you can protect those tender plants underneath. So leave the leaves, it's a must. So I just, if you leave your leaves, kiss yourself. If you don't leave your leaves, I would just be curious that after these conversations, you might consider leaving your leaves in your beds. So there's many reasons to leave the leaves. These are all the roles that they will play in our ecosystem. So there's so many good reasons to leave your leaves. I like to leave my leaves. Many clients don't, even after encouraging them, but it's their garden. In my gardens, I leave my leaves. They do all this. My soil is beautiful because I have always left leaves in my garden beds. Yes, in the springtime, I get out there and I usually get out with a broom and I usually pick a nice windy day and I just start sweeping my leaves out of my beds because I am a lazy, cheap gardener and I like to stay off my knees as much as possible. So the leaves just kind of blow through the neighborhood. And the good news is that they don't even know they need them. So it's just addition to my neighbor's garden beds that I'm always like, you are welcome because you need some of those leaves in your gardens. I'm not fussy. Even after I do my little bit of cleanup, I always leave leaves in my bed. If you saw my beds now, there's leaves in them. They're not matted down, but I do like them because they are perfect for your garden beds. I never use any kind of fertilizers, anything like that. I've always been all natural and I always leave my leaves. So we're going to talk about things in the garden. I have obsessive weeding disorder. I'm sure many of you do. So we're going to talk about deadly sins in the garden. And you may recognize some of these and you may not, but you may also have some of these in your gardens. So I love perennial exchanges. I think it's really nice. It's generous to give people plants. But if I take a plant from somebody, which I never do, but if I did, and I always advise, if you're going to take somebody's plant, you're always going to want to bare root it before you put it in your garden. And here's why. If you don't bare root that and they have one of the deadly sins that I'm going to show you, you are going to transfer that deadly sin right to your garden. Or if you have a deadly sin in your garden, and I'm going to show you a series of deadly sins, if you're going to move something out of that deadly sin garden bed, you must bare root it before you put it somewhere else, or you are just going to spread that problem all through your gardens. Now, here's the deadly sins. Bindweed, I don't know if you all have it, but we have it all over it around town. Bindweed, very invasive. Some people think that it's morning glory. It's not. There is nothing glorious about bindweed. Thistle, so Canadian thistle, so invasive in the garden. You do not want any kind of thistle in your garden bed. It's so hard to get rid of, but I'm going to show you a solution on how we get rid of these invasive, deadly sins in our garden. Here's another one. So this is a plant that they actually sell in Michigan. It's called the chameleon plant. It's so invasive. You don't want it in your garden. If you're not sure, when you get to the garden center, just smell it because it smells awful. But it is a deadly sin and it will spread throughout your garden and you will have a horrible time trying to get rid of it. Here's another one. We have a lot of this in our gardens, bishop's weed, or it's called snow on the mountain. There's the variegated and the non-variegated. If you have this in your garden, you might know that it is considered an invasive weed. Okay, so we'll continue. Lastly, oh, there's one more after this, but grass is so invasive in your garden beds. That's why we talked about keeping those bed lines nice and manicured. Remember, grass cannot grow in the air, so we want our bed lines, our natural bed lines, nice and neat. They're also very attractive when they're deep, but we're keeping that grass out of our beds. And lastly, horsetail. So I don't know if you have horsetail, but it is, excuse me, a very, very invasive weed. You don't want them in your garden, but I promise help is on its way. So we do a process here in Michigan. It's called solarization, and it's nothing we thought of, but it is a process that we use. Farmers have been using it forever, and I'm going to show you how we do it. But why it works is the heat is generated up under this plastic, and I'm going to show you how we do that, because all the things that I shared with you, they all have in common rhizomes. So instead of growing down, they grow this way. They're going to grow long way. And the more you start digging and the more you start pulling, all you're doing is invigorating these to be more aggressive and to continue spreading more and more. So we want to avoid doing that. So here's a picture of how we do the plastic. This is not landscape fabric. This is plastic. And the equivalent of doing this is simple. It would be like if we all put a plastic bag over our head, what would happen? Well, we would all start passing out and dying from lack of air, right? The same thing happens when we do this with invasive weeds. Now, a couple things why I'm showing you this. For instance, this is a bed that I did a design for, and the homeowner wanted it planted right away. But unfortunately, she had invasive weeds in this quadrant garden. So we had to do the solarizing process first. Now, if you're going to solarize, you don't get in there and start pulling out these weeds. If you have, yes, say, a shrub in there, you have to remove the woody shrub because you can't solarize that. This is strictly for weeds. Nothing wood can go in there. But here's what you do. You don't get in there and you don't start weeding, but you just start stomping down these invasives. Then we lay plastic over the top of them, and the plastic is probably going to come in sheets. And I just want to note this so I don't forget. If you're doing sheets, you want to make sure that you're overlapping that sheet, because what will happen with these rhizomes is they're going to start trying to go to where they're going to get air, water, sunlight. So you want to make sure you overlap, because they are going to rear their ugly heads somewhere in your garden. And you can see where the plastic stops at the grass. Well, we weigh everything down with the bricks, with stone, whatever you can. Sometimes we will use landscape staples to hold that plastic down. But the plastic is over on the grass area, but it's still going to look for air pockets. There's not going to be a lot, but when you do, if you do see an air pocket, what you're going to do is you're just going to cut. You're not going to pull. We're not going to pull anymore, because we're just going to keep depriving it of what it's looking for, which is air, water, sunlight. So we're smothering them out. The next question is always, well, how long do I leave it there? And that's a great question. If you're in a very sunny location, it's going to start heating up, decomposing faster than you're in a shaded area. So it's important you leave the plastic on there for as long as it takes, because there is no other way to get rid of these invasive weeds. So I hope there's some questions about this process at the end. But this is what we do. This is called solarization, and it works. It smothers out those invasive weeds. You can also use it on a lily of the valley, myrtle ground cover, any invasive ground cover, you can also use it there. So say after a couple months, you lift up a piece of plastic, you see what's going on. It's still going strong, cover it back up and walk away. And you have to leave it for however long it takes. Excuse me. So now we're going to talk about a natural weed barrier. These are two of my favorite processes, and we do these all the time. So natural, and I'm sure many gardeners out there are using cardboard or they're using newspaper, but we love it. We love it because as it's decomposing, it is smothering out, it's adding nutrients to the soil. You cannot use these on those invasive weeds that we just talked about. These are on your typical garden weeds. Now, for instance, right here, what we're doing is this was a grass bed. So there was grass, there's two beds across from one another. And the homeowner decided that they wanted to get rid of the grass and they wanted to create a pathway. So instead of removing that grass, which is, as we know, backbreaking work, and unless you have a sod cutter and unless you have a whole lot of strength and some health, where we live, we cannot dispose of that. We have to take it somewhere and have it disposed of. They won't take it in our weekly garden or garbage. So you have to figure out, where am I going to dispose of this? But what we did here is we just laid that cardboard right over the grass. It's going to smother that grass out. And as it's decomposing, you're not even ever going to see that grass again. And all we did was we laid beautiful stepping stones after we finished off the area. I wanted to show this picture just so you could see the grass, which we are covering, but we're joining these two beds, stepping stones, and it was easy peasy. We did it in, once we laid that cardboard down, well, you can see we're extending it, but once you lay that cardboard down, you put your mulch on top of it and you are done. One and done, a really easy process. So cardboard, and I will tell you, the best cardboard for gardeners is at Costco. So you can go right to the toilet paper aisle, see that cardboard there, that is like gold. It is free, you don't even have to be a member. Walk in, load that flatbed up with your cardboard, lay it in your garden. Spring is a wonderful time to lay cardboard before you mulch. You will not weed all summer long. So if you want to get rid of grass, the cardboard is it takes a little bit longer than if you were going to sod cut it, but it's a heck of a lot easier for home gardeners to manage. So, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way again. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to share with you some more secrets in the garden to help keep you off your feet, off your knees, on your feet, and to make gardening enjoyable until the very end of time. So, garden should be our love, not our labor of love. Now, this has always been my philosophy. I just want my gardens to be simple and beautiful. So here's just a few things. Oftentimes people ask, well, when should I remove old shrubs and old trees? Well, when they start looking like this. And believe it or not, people are just still shearing things like this. So just know that everything has a lifetime. And when it's no longer bringing you joy, get rid of it. It doesn't even matter if it was Aunt Millie's. She doesn't want you to keep something that you don't love anymore or that doesn't bring you joy. So I will just tell clients, just turn your head. We'll get them out of there. By the time you turn around, you will not even remember these old gnarly shrubs. So here's Pink Bucket Challenge. I like to share this with gardeners because sometimes we can get overwhelmed in our gardens. Well, I like this Pink Bucket Challenge. So I will go out in my gardens after dinner, and I don't have a lot of weeds in my gardens, but I'll just go out there and I just will start picking here and there. So same for you. After dinner, it's a great time to go out. The sun is down. Grab a bucket. If you fill that bucket up, call it a day. Go back out the next day. So don't overwhelm yourself with the weeds in your garden. So I want to talk to you about Maintenance Alley. Actually, this is a client's house. I'm on my knees. I'm doing a little bit of weeding back here, and this is a perfect picture of a maintenance alley. So you can see the importance of this is that when you're planting, remember we talked about how things are always up against the house. You can't get in there. You can't shear. You can't wash your windows. This is why the maintenance alley is so important. So anytime you are planting something new in your garden and you're by your home, you always want to take that tape measure out. Remember that tape measure is one of the most important tools in your toolbox. So take the tape measure out. I like to come 2 feet, 2.5, 3 is even ideal. This allows you to get in there and shear shrubs, wash windows. So again, bring those plants out, give yourself space to get in there and do the work that you have to do. So we call this maintenance alley. Never, ever, ever, we never use landscape fabric. Yes, we use plastic. It's not meant to stay there. It's meant to just assist in the solarizing process, but we never use plastic, and we are forever tearing up plastic. Here is a picture, because know that weeds grow under it, weeds grow on top of it. It is the worst things we can put in our garden. I just cannot stress that enough. If anyone tries to sell you landscape fabric, just say no. It doesn't work. So here's a great little tool. It's called a 5-in-1. And I wear a tool belt, and I have a 5-in-1 in my tool belt. It is great. You can get it in the painting department at your favorite hardware store. But what's great about it is that it is perfect for pulling weeds or running that hook end of it through your sidewalk, cracks in the sidewalk, pavers, wherever you want to get weeds out. It just rolls through there so easily, and it's a very handy, inexpensive tool. So make sure you add one to your toolbox. And the flat end is also, if you're not a fan of moss, and maybe they're on your pavers while you're down there doing some weeding, you can just use that flat end to scrape the moss off either the sidewalk or the pavers, wherever you don't want it. So just quickly, I'm going to talk about flipping sod. So remember, we talked about if we're doing a new garden bed and we're removing sod and we're burning up, that just happens to be the case in this scenario. We're building up that soil. So we use the sod. We took the sod, instead of disposing of it, we flipped it over, and then we put our topsoil, our good soil on top to berm up. So it's an easy way to get rid of sod. We flip sod a lot. Remember, when you flip it over, it's going to decompose. So instead of having to haul it away, you can think about, where can I flip that sod and get rid of it quickly? So there's the bed edge again. There's that half moon spade. Make sure that we're always doing deep, nice bed edges. Never use rock. If you have rocks in your garden, you have my sympathies. This is a garden I take care of. It's a beautiful garden, front and back, but unfortunately there's rocks in it. And again, they're very hard on your knees and your feet to continually crawl through there to pull weeds. So I'm not a fan of rocks in the garden at all. There is also landscape fabric under that, which I would never do, but it's done. And so there we have it. So here's a big controversial thing. Should I remove burlap in the steel cage? I will tell you that as landscapers, we never remove the steel cage. And yes, we cut the rope, we pull the burlap back, but we leave that intact for a reason. Most of our trees come from the south. That steel cage holds that root ball in place. Because if you take it off, if you've ever taken a steel cage off a root ball, oftentimes it'll just crumble apart because their soil is much different than ours. So I know master gardeners always say, we always leave the steel, or we always take it off, but I will tell you, as landscapers, we never take it off. Yes, pull it back, but we always leave the cage. So what do I do if I have tree? And I know I'm running out of time, so if you need me just to be quiet, I will. Or if you want me to keep going, I'm almost done. I will talk forever if you don't stop me. But this
No,
is
just go, Jan.
keep going.
Yeah, go for a little bit. I think we're fine.
Okay, just cut me off when you want. But this is sometimes a problem for people when we have our tree roots coming up, and what do we do with them? Well, remember that cardboard. Here's what I like to do with them. Don't try to remove grass. Don't try to plant things. It never works. What we will do is we will take the cardboard and we will do whatever kind of shape we want to have around that tree. So we put the cardboard down, then we'll mulch it nicely. We'll do a nice bed edge. So you have your bed edge, you have your cardboard and your mulch, because we don't want to keep riding over those tree roots with our mowers. So it's an easy fix. You can sometimes put a beautiful bench under it or a big pot with flowers, but it just rectifies areas like this. So I'm showing you this. We're getting ready to plant it. If you do have, you're planting something with a big root ball like this, you can see we have the hole ready. What we will do is we will fill the hole with water, and then this big heavy root ball goes in it. And the reason that we fill it with water is that once it gets in that hole with water, it's easy to shift it around if you want a certain angle. So, because if you try to shift, you put it in the hole and you try to shift it, it's very heavy. So you can just put it in there and shift it easily when it's filled with water. So just another tip, don't build your patio too small. You can see here, this patio got expanded. Make sure you have growing families. If you're going to put a patio in, put in one that will accommodate all your furniture. So quickly, I'll just go over water runoff quickly because I think it's important. Here's a watering schedule. I'll add that if you want copies of these for your watering schedule for new plantings. So I'm just a stickler about downspouts. If you have downspouts, go home and look at your downspouts. Ideally, the homeowner didn't want this here, but we would have ran that downspout. You can see it coming from the roof, but we would have ran it out on the grass to pop out on the grass. We want to retain the stormwater on our properties. So it's important. If the time to do it is when you're putting in a new garden bed, it's nice to retain the water. It's sustainable. Keep it on your property instead of down our storm drains. And then I just love a catch basin. So I'm showing you that picture for that reason. And then here's just a 100% permeable property. So everything flows down into the earth and not down into the storm drains. Organic garden remedies, I'll just go through these quickly, and I will also send this so you don't have to write any of these down. And I'm trying to talk quickly to be conscious of the time. I apologize. So here's just lawn care. You're going to get all this. These are just things to keep some of these pests away with pesticides and herbicides. Here's just some more. You'll get all these recipes. They're all here, and I will send them to you. Recycle, reuse. I'll also send you pictures of these because these are fun. These are just things that you can recycle in the garden. All you need is something that holds soil and drainage, and this one happens to meet all that criteria, but just fun things, ideas to do in your garden. And I will send these to you. So unusual things to compost. One of my favorites is, of course, the nail clipping. So I always just like to say you can have family days, everybody over the compost bin. It's nail clipping time. So with that, what's hot? Many things have stayed the same about what's hot in the gardens. I won't go through all of them, but I will include it so you have these notes. And then rest of the story quickly, I'll tell you that Michael delivered the boulder to me in 2005. The next year in 2006, it was February. He was on a fishing trip with his buddies and returning luggage. He said to me, Jano, let's start a business. And I had a great corporate job. I said, Michael, it's just not good timing for me to start a business. We came from a family of entrepreneurs, but the timing wasn't right. So the following month, which was March, Mike was 49 years old and passed away from a massive heart attack. And so that following month was April, and I started my business plan and strategy to exit corporate America. And I first always remember what Michael said is can't, never could. So play in the dirt because life is too short to have clean fingernails. So with that, if you'd like to follow us on Facebook, we have over, I think, 600,000 fans following us. We'd love for you to join us. That's a book. It's available on Amazon. Good reviews are always welcome. Thank you so much for letting me speak tonight, and may all your gardens grow.